My name is Evelyn Harper, and this is the story of how I came to understand the true meaning of terror. It all started when I inherited my grandparents' old farmhouse in the countryside, a place I hadn't visited since I was a child. The idea of a peaceful retreat away from the city was appealing, so I decided to spend the summer there, alone. I couldn't have known then that my peaceful retreat would turn into a nightmare. The farmhouse was nestled between vast, empty fields, the nearest neighbor miles away. The air was fresh and the scenery picturesque, but something about the place felt off from the moment I arrived. Perhaps it was the way the wind seemed to whisper secrets through the trees, or the way the fields seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing all sound. On my first night, I was awakened by a noise, a faint, distant sound like a child crying. I brushed it off as my imagination or the wind playing tricks on me. However, the crying continued night after night, always around the same time, just as the clock struck midnight. Determined to uncover the source, I ventured out one night, flashlight in hand, following the sound across the fields. The crying grew louder as I neared an old, dilapidated barn that I had never noticed before. The wooden structure loomed in the moonlight, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed the creaky door open. Inside, the barn was empty, save for an old rocking chair in the center of the room. It swayed gently, as if someone had just been sitting in it. The crying had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached the chair. There, scratched into the floorboards, was a single word, Evelyn. I stumbled back, my mind racing. How could my name be here? I fled the barn, racing back to the farmhouse, but the crying followed me, echoing through the night. No matter where I went, it was always there, relentless and haunting. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself trapped in a nightmare. I researched the history of the farmhouse, hoping to find some answers. What I discovered left me breathless with fear. Decades ago, a family had lived there, a mother, father, and their young daughter named Clara. Clara had gone missing, and despite exhaustive searches, her body was never found. The parents, consumed by grief, claimed to hear her crying at night until they too vanished without a trace. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Clara's spirit was still here, bound to the farmhouse, and now she had latched onto me. Desperation clawed at my sanity. I tried to leave, but every attempt was thwarted by unseen forces. The car wouldn't start, the phone lines were dead, and the crying grew louder, more insistent. One stormy night, as the clock struck midnight, I heard the crying again, louder than ever. This time, it was inside the house. I followed the sound to the attic, my heart pounding with each step. There in the corner stood a little girl in a white dress, her eyes hollow and lifeless. Clara. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her ghostly face. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a hollow echo. I don't remember much after that. The next morning, a passing farmer found me unconscious in the field, clutching a small dirt-covered locket. Inside was a faded photograph of Clara and her parents. The farmhouse was silent after that. The crying ceased, but I knew I could never go back. Even now, as I write this from the safety of my apartment in the city, I can still hear her whisper in the wind, a reminder of the terror that lurks in the lonesome fields.
My name is Jonathan Crane, and this is the story of how I became a prisoner of Blackwood Isle. If you ever find this journal, heed my warning, never set foot on that cursed land. It all began with a letter. A seemingly innocuous envelope slipped under my door one rainy evening. The parchment inside bore the unmistakable seal of the Blackwood family, an old and influential lineage shrouded in mystery. The letter invited me to investigate the sudden disappearance of the last heir, Evelyn Blackwood, on their private island. As an investigative journalist, such a story was irresistible. I arrived at the island on a foggy morning. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, the waves crashing against the jagged rocks with a ferocity that mirrored the unease growing in my chest. The island was desolate, its only structure a towering mansion that loomed like a specter against the gray sky. The mansion was a relic of a bygone era, its grand facade marred by years of neglect. Vines crept up the stone walls, and the windows, covered in a layer of grime, seemed to watch me with 1,000 unseen eyes. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, which groaned in protest, and stepped into the dimly lit foyer. The air inside was stale, and the silence was oppressive. I called out, my voice echoing eerily through the empty halls. There was no response. I decided to start my investigation in the library, a cavernous room lined with dusty shelves and filled with the faint scent of old books. As I pored over the family records, I discovered a chilling history of madness and murder that plagued the Blackwood lineage. Each generation was marked by tragic deaths and inexplicable disappearances, all culminating in the current mystery of Evelyn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced on the walls, I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakable. It seemed to come from the very walls of the mansion. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, until I reached a hidden doorway behind a large portrait of the Blackwood ancestors. The passage beyond was narrow and cold, the air thick with the scent of earth and rot. I descended a spiral staircase, my footsteps echoing ominously in the confined space. At the bottom, I found myself in a dark, damp cellar. In the center of the room was a stone altar, and upon it lay a book bound in human skin. The whispers grew louder, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and spun around, but there was no one there. Panic set in, and I stumbled back, knocking over a candelabrum. The flames flickered and then went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, and its weak beam revealed something that froze my blood, the spectral figure of a woman, her eyes hollow and her mouth twisted in a silent scream. Evelyn. Her ghostly form drifted toward me, her finger pointing accusingly. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "The island is cursed. We are all prisoners, bound by the sins of our ancestors." Before I could react, the ground beneath me gave way, and I fell into a pit of darkness. When I awoke, I was back in the mansion, but something was different. The air was colder, the shadows deeper. I realized with dawning horror that I was no longer alone. The spirits of the Blackwood family surrounded me, their eyes filled with eternal torment. I am now trapped on Blackwood Isle, my every attempt to escape thwarted by the vengeful spirits that roam its halls. My only hope is that someone, someday, will find this journal and heed my warning. Stay away from Blackwood Isle, for its curse is eternal, and once you set foot on its haunted shores, there is no escape. And so, with trembling hands, I write these final words.
My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I still can't shake the memory of that night. If you're ever on a deserted road, waiting for a bus in the dead of night, think twice before you step on board. It was late, and I was tired. I had just finished a long shift at the hospital and missed my usual bus. The next one wouldn't come for another hour. As I stood at the empty bus stop, the streetlights flickering above me, I felt a chill run down my spine. The street was deserted, and the silence was almost deafening. I checked my watch. Midnight. The bus was due any minute. I sighed, pulling my coat tighter around me to ward off the cold. That's when I saw it, a bus, its headlights cutting through the darkness, approaching from the distance. It was an old model, one I hadn't seen in years. The bus came to a stop in front of me, its doors creaking open. The driver, an old man with hollow eyes, nodded at me. I hesitated for a moment, but then shook off the feeling of unease and stepped inside. The doors closed behind me with a heavy thud. The interior was dimly lit, and the seats were worn and torn. As I walked down the aisle, I noticed there were only a few passengers, all sitting silently, their faces hidden in the shadows. I found a seat near the back and sat down, trying to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The bus started moving, and I stared out the window, watching the dark streets pass by. The ride was unnervingly silent. No one spoke, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. I tried to distract myself by looking at my phone, but there was no signal. Suddenly, the bus jolted to a stop. I looked up and saw that we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods. The driver turned around, his eyes locking onto mine in the rearview mirror. "End of the line?" he said in a gravelly voice. Confused and scared, I stood up and looked around. The other passengers remained seated, their faces now eerily pale and expressionless. "This can't be the end," I protested. "I'm not where I need to be." The driver didn't respond. Instead, the passengers slowly turned their heads to face me, their eyes empty and cold. Panic set in, and I rushed to the front of the bus. "Let me off!" I shouted. The driver finally spoke again. "You wanted a ride. This is where it ends." Desperation took over, and I pushed past him, forcing the doors open. I stumbled out into the cold night air, my breath visible in the chill. The bus doors slammed shut behind me, and the old vehicle disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone on the deserted road. I stood there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I pulled out my phone again, and this time I had a signal. I called a friend to come get me and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. When my friend arrived, I told her about the bus, but she just looked at me with concern. "Sarah," she said softly, "there hasn't been a bus on this route for years. They discontinued it after a terrible accident. The driver and all the passengers died." I felt a chill run down my spine as her words sank in. I had ridden a bus that shouldn't exist, with passengers who were long dead. To this day, I don't know why I was spared or what those spirits wanted, but one thing is certain: I'll never forget the ride on that midnight bus. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I warn you, if you ever find yourself alone at a bus stop in the dead of night, be careful which bus you board. Some journeys should never be taken.
My name is Alex Harper, and I used to think I was the best thief in the city. This is the story of the night I learned how wrong I was. If you're reading this, remember, some things are better left alone. It was a dark night with no moon, ideal for the job I had planned. I'd been watching Blackwood Jewelers for weeks, noting the security and the guards' routines. My target was the blood diamond, a gem so valuable it could change my life. I slipped into the alley behind the store, blending into the shadows with my black clothes. I picked the lock on the back door with ease and slipped inside. The store was silent, the only sound my own breathing. I carefully avoided the laser sensors as I made my way to the display case holding the blood diamond. As I disabled the alarm system, I felt a sudden chill. The air grew heavy, and it felt like someone was watching me. I shook off the feeling and opened the case. There it was, the blood diamond, glittering in the faint light. I reached for it, but something in the reflection of the glass caught my eye. I turned around slowly, heart pounding. At first, I saw nothing, just the empty store. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something move in the shadows. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice shaky. No answer. I took a step back, holding the diamond. The shadows seemed to form a shape like a person, but its eyes glowed red, and its body seemed to ripple like a mirage. Fear gripped me, and I stumbled backward, almost dropping the diamond. The figure moved closer, gliding silently. I turned to run, but my legs felt heavy. The air was thick with a sense of dread, and I could barely breathe. "Leave," the figure whispered, its voice raspy. "This place is cursed. You have no idea what you've done." I finally managed to run, sprinting toward the exit. As I did, I felt a cold touch on my arm and a sharp pain. I burst through the back door into the night air and didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, my heart racing. When I looked back, the street was empty. I ducked into an alley and collapsed, panting. My arm hurt where the figure had touched me, and I saw a dark mark like a burn. I threw the blood diamond away as far as I could. Whatever it wasn't worth it. I made my way home, my mind racing with fear and confusion. In the days that followed, the mark on my arm got worse, and I had nightmares. I felt like the figure was always watching me, just out of sight. I tried to warn others, but no one believed me. They said I was crazy, a thief who'd lost his mind. But I know the truth. Something in that store was not of this world, something old and dangerous. It guards the treasures of Blackwood Jewelers, and it doesn't forgive intruders.
My name is David Thompson, and I thought I had seen it all. That is, until one night I found myself on a road under a bridge that changed everything. If you ever find yourself there, turn around and leave. It was a typical Friday night. I was driving home late after a long week at work, eager to get home and relax. I decided to take a shortcut, a road that went under an old bridge. I had taken it before during the day, but never at night. The sky was moonless, and the only light came from my car's headlights cutting through the darkness. The road was eerily empty, and the silence was only broken by the hum of my engine. As I approached the bridge, a sense of unease settled over me. The bridge loomed ahead, its old, crumbling structure casting long shadows on the road beneath. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to my tired mind. I drove under the bridge, the darkness swallowing my car. The temperature seemed to drop, and my headlights flickered briefly, making my heart skip a beat. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and pressed on, my eyes scanning the shadows nervously. About halfway through, I saw it, a figure standing on the side of the road, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I slowed down, my curiosity piqued despite my better judgment. The figure didn't move, and as I got closer, I could see it was a woman. She was dressed in tattered clothes, her hair hanging over her face. I stopped the car and rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears. She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge my presence. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was very wrong. Suddenly, she lifted her head and I saw her eyes, or rather, the empty sockets where her eyes should have been. I gasped and slammed on the gas, my car lurching forward. The figure vanished from my rearview mirror, but the dread lingered. As I sped away, my car started to sputter, the engine choking. I glanced at the dashboard and saw the fuel gauge dropping rapidly, even though I had filled up earlier. Panic set in as the car rolled to a stop. I was stuck, under the bridge. The silence was oppressive, and I could hear my own breathing, ragged and fast. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. I decided to get out and walk, hoping to find help or at least get out from under the bridge. The moment I stepped out, I felt it. A presence, cold and malevolent. I turned, and there she was again, standing in front of me, her empty eye sockets fixed on me. She moved closer, her movements jerky and unnatural. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice echoing in the still air. "This place is cursed." I turned and ran, not looking back. The darkness seemed to close in around me, and I could hear whispers, voices telling me to leave. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the side of the road, far from the bridge. A passing car eventually found me, the driver kind enough to give me a ride to the nearest gas station. I didn't tell him what I saw, didn't know how to explain it. All I knew was that I had to get away. I've never taken that shortcut again. I don't drive at night anymore if I can help it. The road under the bridge remains a haunting memory, a reminder of the night I encountered something beyond explanation. My name is David Thompson, and if you ever find yourself on that road under the bridge, heed my warning. Some places are meant to be left alone, and some roads should never be traveled after dark.
My name is Emily Carter, and I never believed in ghosts until I started working at the old hospital. If you ever find yourself in the basement, near the boiler room, get out as fast as you can. It was my third week as a night shift nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. One evening, my supervisor asked me to retrieve medical supplies from the basement. The basement was a maze of narrow hallways and dimly lit rooms, and at its heart was the boiler room, a place everyone avoided. As I descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and the sound of the hospital above faded into an eerie silence. I found the storage room and gathered the supplies. As I was about to leave, I heard a faint, rhythmic thumping coming from the direction of the boiler room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I reached the door to the boiler room and hesitated. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb. The boiler itself was a massive, hulking machine that looked like it hadn't been serviced in decades. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I spun around, my heart racing, and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped even further, and I could see my breath in the cold air. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, now accompanied by a faint whispering. There, standing next to the machine, was a figure, a man dressed in old-fashioned work clothes, his face pale and eyes hollow. "Who are you?" I stammered. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it moved closer, its eyes locked onto mine. The whispering grew louder, and I could make out words leave. "Now. Before it's too late." I backed away, my heart pounding. The figure continued to approach, and I felt a cold hand grasp my shoulder. I screamed and yanked myself free, stumbling backward into the boiler. The machine roared to life, its pipes rattling violently. Desperation took over, and I threw myself at the door, pounding on it with all my strength. To my surprise, it suddenly gave way, and I fell into the hallway. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I was back on the main floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No one believed me when I told them what happened. They all thought I was just another overworked nurse with an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. The figure in the boiler room, the whispers, the cold touch, it was all real. If you ever find yourself at St. Mary's, heed my warning, stay away from the basement, and whatever you do, don't go near the boiler room.
My name is Alex Turner, and I live for the thrill of speed. Racing cars have been my passion since I was a kid. The roar of the engine, the rush of adrenaline, the blurred scenery, all of it makes me feel truly alive. But one night, everything changed. I went from living for the thrill to barely surviving it. It was a foggy Friday night, and I was prepping my car for a late-night practice run on a secluded stretch of road known among racers as the Devil's Curve. The name wasn't just for show, many had lost control and crashed there. But I wasn't afraid, I was determined to conquer it. As I revved up my engine, the fog thickened, wrapping around my car like a ghostly shroud. I shook off the eerie feeling creeping up my spine, attributing it to the cold night air. With a final check of my gear, I took off, tires screeching against the asphalt. The first few miles were smooth, the familiar rush of speed bringing a smile to my face. But as I approached the Devil's Curve, the fog grew denser. My headlights barely cut through the mist, and the road ahead seemed to vanish into nothingness. Suddenly, I saw something, or someone, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt inches away from the figure. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned racing gear, his eyes glowing an unnatural red. "Who are you?" I shouted, heart pounding in my chest. The man stepped closer, his voice a chilling whisper. "I am the spirit of this curve, the one who never made it out alive." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "What do you want?" "To warn you," he replied. "Turn back now, or face the same fate as I did." Fear and determination battled within me. I couldn't let a ghost story scare me away. I was Alex Turner, and I didn't back down from anything. I nodded, more to convince myself than him, and revved my engine once more. The spirit's form dissolved into the fog as I sped forward, determined to conquer the Devil's Curve. But the road seemed to stretch endlessly, and my car began to behave strangely, almost as if it had a mind of its own. The steering wheel jerked violently, trying to pull me off the road. "Stay with me," I muttered through gritted teeth, wrestling for control. Suddenly, the spirit's voice echoed in my mind. "Remember, Alex, it's not just about speed. It's about control. Respect the road." Taking a deep breath, I slowed down, easing my grip on the wheel. The car stabilized, and the fog began to lift. As I rounded the final bend of the Devil's Curve, dawn broke, bathing the road in a soft, golden light. I pulled over, heart still racing but filled with a strange sense of peace. I had made it. Not by defying the spirit's warning, but by heeding it. The thrill of the race was still there, but now tempered with a newfound respect for the road and the unseen forces that guarded it. From that day on, every time I race, I remember the spirit's words.
My name is Alex, and I have always been curious. From a young age, I poked and prodded at the world, eager to unveil its mysteries. But there is one mystery I wish I had never uncovered. It all started when I moved into my great-aunt Clara's old house. The place was a Victorian masterpiece, with creaky wooden floors and rooms filled with antiquated furniture. But the house had one peculiar feature, a door at the end of the second-floor hallway that was always locked. Aunt Clara had made it explicitly clear in her will that no one was to open that door. Of course, that made me want to open it even more. Every night, I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what could be behind that door. Was it treasure? A secret room filled with forgotten heirlooms? Or maybe something more sinister? My imagination ran wild with possibilities. One evening, the curiosity became too much to bear. I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the stairs, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. As I approached the door, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air around it was noticeably colder, and a strange, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to emanate from behind the door. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of skeleton keys I had found in Clara's old desk. My hands trembled as I tried each key in the lock. Finally, one of them turned, and with a click, the door creaked open. The room beyond was dark and musty. I shone my flashlight around, revealing cobwebs and dust-covered furniture. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. It seemed out of place, almost as if it didn't belong to this world. As I approached the mirror, I noticed something odd. My reflection was wrong. Instead of mimicking my movements, it stood still, staring back at me with hollow eyes. A sense of dread washed over me, and I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. The reflection began to change. Its face contorted into a twisted grin, and its eyes grew darker and more malevolent. Then it spoke. "You shouldn't have opened the door, Alex." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I turned to see a figure standing behind me. It was Aunt Clara, but she looked different. Her face was gaunt, her skin pale, and her eyes were the same hollow voids as my reflection. "You've let it out," she whispered, her voice echoing around the room. Suddenly, the mirror shattered and a gust of icy wind filled the room. The darkness seemed to come alive, swirling around me, suffocating me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing I remember is Aunt Clara's voice, cold and unforgiving. "Now, you are trapped, forever." When I woke up, I was no longer in the room. I was in the mirror, staring out at the world through a veil of glass. The house was different, abandoned, and decayed. Years had passed, and I was a prisoner in my own curiosity. To anyone who finds this journal, heed my warning. There are some doors that should never be opened, some mysteries that should remain unsolved. If you value your sanity, leave this place and never look back. As for me, I am trapped in the reflection, waiting for the next curious soul to release me.
My name is Ethan Wright, and I have always been a skeptic. Ghosts, spirits, the supernatural, they were nothing more than stories to me, until the night I found myself face to face with the unexplainable. It was late October, and I had been hired to renovate an old Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town. The house, known locally as the Whispering Manor, had been abandoned for decades. Despite its eerie reputation, I saw it as nothing more than an opportunity to restore a beautiful piece of architecture and make a decent profit. As I walked through the grand, decaying halls on my first day, I couldn't help but marvel at the intricate woodwork and stained glass windows, dulled by years of neglect. The air was thick with dust, and each step echoed through the empty rooms, giving the place an almost living presence. I set up my tools in what must have once been a lavish drawing room, and as the sun set, I decided to work late into the night. The locals had warned me about the house, saying it came alive after dark, but I laughed it off. Superstitions had no place in my world. Around midnight, I took a break and sat down with a thermos of coffee. The silence was profound, almost oppressive, and I began to feel a chill despite the warmth of my drink. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of leaves outside. "Ethan." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was probably just the wind, I told myself, but the rational part of my mind was losing ground to a creeping fear. I stood up and walked towards the source of the sound, flashlight in hand,
the beam cutting through the thick darkness. "Ethan?" The whisper was louder now, unmistakable. It seemed to come from the basement, a place I had avoided earlier due to its ominous appearance. Swallowing my fear, I descended the creaking stairs, each step a testament to my determination, or perhaps my foolishness. The basement was a cavernous space filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. The air was damp and cold, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. As I scanned the room with my flashlight, I noticed an old mirror leaning against the far wall. It was cracked and filthy, but something about it drew me in. "Ethan, help me." The voice was clear now, coming from the mirror itself. I approached it cautiously, my reflection distorted by the cracks. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. My reflection's eyes turned black, and a cold, clammy hand reached out from the mirror, grabbing my wrist. I tried to pull away, but the grip was too strong. The hand pulled me closer, and I felt a force trying to drag me into the mirror. My mind raced, panic overtaking reason. Summoning all my strength, I yanked my arm free and stumbled back, crashing into an old table. The mirror fell, shattering into pieces on the floor. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding, and fled the house, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for air. I never went back to Whispering Manor. The project was abandoned, and the house still stands, a testament to the unknown. I don't know what I encountered that night, but I can no longer deny the existence of things beyond our understanding. My name is Ethan Wright, and this is my story. A story of skepticism shattered by the unexplainable, and of a haunting that still lingers in the darkest corners of my mind.